Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray in Beijing. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's three-day visit to Japan takes place at a time when Asia's second and third largest economies are increasingly finding common strategic ground. An important item on Modi's agenda is the final steps of a civil nuclear treaty with his Japanese counterpart, Shinzo Abe. What mutual interests have India and Japan cemented during this summit? What influence will their agreements have on the Asia-Pacific region? And how should China interpret the relationship between India and Japan? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Yang Xiyu, Senior Research Fellow of China Institute of International Studies, and Mr. KGM Varma, China Correspondent for the Press Trust of India. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. One major issue during Prime Minister Modi's third summit with his Japanese counterpart Shinzo Abe is the India-Japan civilian nuclear deal under discussions since 2008. Now, how do you view the current stage of their cooperation, Mr. Yang?
Well, India and Japanese cooperation has been going in smooth progress, and the upcoming nuclear treaty you mentioned would be another important achievements between two countries. But given the background of that India has got a nuclear weapon, India does not sign in the joining the NPT, and that will be the first time for Japan to sign a treaty with a non-NPT member. Also, the other background is Japan had a very disastrous incident in their nuclear incident. So such a treaty will cause widespread public attention.
Is it a sensitive issue for India to sign this pact with Japan, given the nightmarish Chernobyl nuclear disaster, particularly what happened in 2011 when we had the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant and its serious and devastating leaks in East China Sea?
Well, I think the world and both Japan and India have come a distance after Fukushima, I suppose. There was a thorough reviews of nuclear civilian development all over the world, including China, India, Japan, all the places. But I think the causes have been reviewed, have been rectified perhaps. But the fact is that India is on course, along with China perhaps, to have a very high level or maximum civil nuclear power generation. It's nothing new, because this particular nuclear cooperation with Japan is connected to the 2009 waiver of what India procured, the waiver in the nuclear suppliers group in 2009, in which of course China is also a member. At the time, that was an extension of the US-India nuclear accord. As a result of it, India secured that, and the NSG has granted that waiver for India. And after that, India has signed this kind of deals with several other countries, including Russia, France, and perhaps Japan. It will be the third or fourth.
We've done some discussions about the Indian government's plan to join the nuclear suppliers group. The Chinese government has strong reservations about the Indian option.
Yeah.
What do you think of the Chinese decision and the position, basically?
Well, please note, China didn't have a veto in that decision, but we have a very strong, as you mentioned, very strong reservations, because from China's point of view, at least from my point of view, the issue is not a matter of the nuclear proliferation, although this there's some potential, but the nature of the issue is the authority of NPT as a treaty. All the members of the international community should abide by.
Excuse me, is India a party to the NPT?
Yeah, India
not yet.
Is along with Pakistan and Israel. They have not signed the NPT.
Yeah, we frankly speaking, India is a great country. China up to now, China doesn't have a concern about the possible proliferation by India. That's not a major concern by China. But however, China really concerned about the legitimacy and authority of NPT. That is a cornerstone for the international peace. If that's a matter of rule of law. If we have too many exemptions, then the NPT will go collapse. So that's our concerns, and that's our reason for the strong reservation.
To have a better understanding about the Indian bid for the NSG, let's take a quick look at this footage.
India's diplomatic effort for entry into nuclear suppliers group has intensified. India and China have met to discuss the merits of Delhi's application.
China did start a negotiation with the Ministry of External Affairs Joint Secretary level talks to particularly focus on the NSG possibilities for India, in a sense. But I think, again, one meeting has already happened and the second meeting is slated to happen soon. But I don't think there's going to be an immediate breakthrough.
India lost the bid in the plenary meeting held in Seoul in June this year. Several countries, including China, argued against India's entry unless it made commitments to nuclear non-proliferation. But experts believe that India will not sign the non-proliferation treaty.
The NPT says that a nuclear weapon state is defined as one that exploded a device before 1 January 1967. So the NPT is not going to be amended to accommodate India, and India is not going to give up its nuclear weapons to join the NPT. So clearly that is a non-starter.
India has declared that it has been in compliance with the NSG guidelines for the past 7 years and would like to take on a larger global role.
This is something that was also acknowledged by the Nuclear Suppliers Group in 2008 when it granted India a special waiver that permits India to engage in civilian nuclear cooperation with the other NSG members. The only difference that it would make, were India to be formally inducted as a member, is that India would then be part of the decision-making structures.
Joining the NSG would give India better access to clean, low-cost nuclear energy, important for its economic growth, and enable it to cut its emissions and reduce air pollution from coal-fired power plants. However, with the nuclear non-proliferation issue unresolved, its path to membership is far from clear.
In your opinion, gentlemen, why did Japan reach out to India and ask for a more active partnership in this regard? And why did India choose Japan for partnership instead of China?
Well, to take on what Professor said, is that the view in India and probably the best part of the world is that NPT is probably has passed its prime. And it's time for the world to review, considering the fact that, a number of other countries started developing their own nuclear programs. And in order to bring them into the fold, I think the China and perhaps the rest of the world should look beyond NPT. And China now, I think, has come to a stage where it is working out modalities along with the majority of the NSG members who are backing India's case in any case, to work out modalities to work to enable the non-NPT countries to join NSG, which will make it a complete organization. Perhaps the other entry is, of course, Pakistan also has applied, but it becomes a case-by-case entry after that. But once you have a general modalities for entry of the members, perhaps that makes it easier for the enlargement of the NSG, as well as the relevance of NPT gets enlarged too.
Xu Yu, is it true that the NPT has passed its prime? Is it just a product of the Cold War?
Well, yes, it was set up in the Cold War. However, the nature, the spirit, the principles in NPT was and is designed to guarantee a safer world. One of the former UN Secretary General said, thanks to NPT, or we would witness 40, even 50 nuclear weapon states in the world. So although we have entered into the post-Cold War era, however, the threats of nuclear weapon proliferation not only remain but are even higher. That's why on the current situation, you mentioned the post-Cold War era, we need to make greater efforts to maintain, to guarantee the NPT as implementable rules all over the globe.
Despite the proactive diplomacy that leaders from both Pakistan and India have made to get rid of and reduce the nuclear threats, after all, these two major countries in South Asia are nuclear armed. Given the considerable concerns of the US government about the DPRK nuclear testing and missile launch, is it a matter of a double standards on the American side to keep one eye open and close the other with regard to the nuclear arms race in many parts of the world, particularly South Asia?
Well, that's not a simple question and a simple answer. Actually, North Korea, it seems to me at least, is quite different from Indian cases. For example, North Korea is the only country who conducted 5 nuclear tests in the first 21st century. For the more important, that is the single only country in the world declared by necessity, under some circumstances, they would launch the preemptive nuclear strike. So that's the single country. So especially the Korean Peninsula is a very highly militarized area. Any kind of nuclear weapon, no matter from the north or the south, would be a disaster for this nation, for the for the Korean nation, and as well for the regional countries.
What is the official policy of New Delhi about nuclear proliferation?
Well, I think India has it developed its nuclear weapons for reasons, obviously. Looking at China, for that matter, because we share, we are the neighbors, and China has already been a nuclear power. So, but after that, I think India has been assuring, and India has developed its entire nuclear proliferation regime under a very strict safeguards. And the majority of the NSG members who have been backing the Indian membership, including US, Japan, and others, they say that, well, India has a very positive record about non-proliferation. But of course, there's no point about comparing Pakistan and bringing Pakistan into the discussion, considering its own problems. But from India's point of view, even Chinese officials who have been advocating this NPT, they have not come up with any allegation of any non-proliferation issues or proliferation issues from India. So I think India's record speaks for itself, and India also has a no first use policy as far as the nuclear weapons are concerned. I think this is what India is trying to rather push the limits of the NPT and the NSG membership, saying that look at our record, and we have been developing this for peaceful nuclear purposes, and we have every right to do that, and we have the necessary technology, and we have every right to obtain new technology as well from the rest of the world. So considering, of course, the kind of energy problems that India is facing at the moment and its own expansion of the nuclear program, India is making a very strong case based on its own record of non-proliferation.
Pakistan has been an all-weather friend of China since perhaps the 1950s and 60s. And,
yeah.
Do you think the relationship between New Delhi and Beijing has somehow been held hostage by a third party? I'm not talking necessarily about Pakistan, but given the strong reservations the Chinese government has for the nuclear suppliers group, to what degree do you think Pakistan gets across or gets in the way?
Well, actually, China has changed or adjusted the mode of the relationship with India and Pakistan that were adversary countries in decades. Now China's way of thinking is try to develop friendship parallel between the two, and furthermore try to bridge two countries to calm down the tension, because the higher tension, the more difficult situation for China, because China wants to make friends for both of them.
Particularly, China wants to build the Belt and Road Initiative and translate it into reality. Thank you very much. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Yang Xiyu, a Senior Research Fellow with the China Institute of International Studies, and Mr. KGM Varma, a China correspondent of the Press Trust of India. We'll be back in a short while. Please do stay with us. Welcome back. Many of those who visited your country came back with a strong feeling that the infrastructure is not as strong as in China. And Prime Minister Modi vows to make a difference. This time around, on the agenda between Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Mr. Modi is the issue of upgrading infrastructure in your country. You have joined AIIB, which aims to make investment in the building of infrastructure in developing countries along the stretches of the Belt and Road Initiative. However, you have decided to accept the Japanese investment and introduce Shinkansen for its railway ambitions. I'm talking about the high-speed railways technologies. Why you have made this decision? And of course the Chinese may have developed a strong feeling of setback because we have failed to win our bid.
Yeah, I think, well, you said India's infrastructure is as good as China's. No. India has to catch up
No. Yeah. I was saying not as strong as in China.
Okay. India has to catch up a great deal with China, there's no doubt. About this railway project, I think India and China, they have been working out rather modalities of a very serious cooperation in the railway sector. There are several areas of railways cooperation going on between the two countries, including training of Indian railway engineers in China's Railway University. Regarding the high-speed train, I think there is no full stop for development of this particular involvement of China in this particular sector, because at this moment, India, I think China has undertaken a feasibility study between the biggest railway track line between New Delhi and Madras, the erstwhile Madras, now it is called Chennai. So it is longer than what you call Beijing and Shanghai. So currently China is doing the feasibility study. But to put record in a proper perspective, I think Japan has got one line that is between Ahmedabad and Mumbai. And India is planning such corridors, the high-speed corridors, like China did with various cities in various nooks and corners of India. So the one thing that what India, I understand, is looking for is a favorable financial rather terms, like what they acquired from Japan. So right now, I think the discussions are not closed. It's not that India has closed the door, if I understand things rightly. The discussions are still continuing, and the feasibility study is yet to be out about the terms. Then the two countries, I suppose, will discuss the modalities for financing and rest of the issues.
Xiyu, China obviously wants to become a maritime power. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the rest of the world sees the rapid expansion of the Chinese naval presence in both East China Sea and the South China Sea. Now, China has had border disputes with India along the 4,000 kilometers of land boundary they share. Mm-hmm. We also have a very serious maritime disputes on Diaoyu Islands in East China Sea. Mm-hmm. Do you believe these are fundamentally the reasons for New Delhi to have chosen Tokyo for being the partnership and for constructing the high-speed railway?
No, not at all. I don't think that's the driving reason for New Delhi and Tokyo to get closer. Actually, both of the countries have mutual strategic needs to get closer. For Japan, they raised a very ambitious strategy. They call it as a free and open Pacific Indian strategy. Something like, in my understanding, something like one road, say, maritime road from Japan to Africa. And the Japanese Prime Minister said India occupied a very important, very critical position in the whole line. If you look at the map, yes, it is. I don't know whether or not Japan raised this strategy want to compete with China's initiative as called as One Road, One Belt. At least, Japan really need India to participate in their ambitious strategy. For India, I think for a long time, India, for various administration, they have sought for Eastern-oriented strategy. They want to enter in Pacific. So that's their decades-long strategy. And Japan is, of course, is an important partner. I don't think, I said not at all, simply because India has been a long time, decades-long leader of non-alignment. In my understanding, India is such a country. They don't want to lead any country else. By the same token, they don't want to be led by any country.
But I'm afraid this tradition of a non-aligned movement that the Indian government has held so dear for decades will be changed as a result of the new geopolitical reconfiguration in the wake of the Cold War. Is there such a possibility, Wama?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
There may be a reorientation of India's rather independent foreign policy as such. Of course, the world is set for a new strategic paradigm now that Mr. Trump is about to take over. We do not know what kind of a strategic that are going to take place in the next 3-4 months when he settles down in his presidency. But at the same time, to put things in perspective, I think Professor has laid out, it's quite correctly, that there is some kind of an independent-mindedness among the Indian intellectuals and in the civil society that guides Indian foreign policy as such. It's not simply the government of the day that takes the decisions. There is a tradition, and there is a history, and there is, of course, the need. You spoke about the third party coming into India-China relations. I've been reporting on India-China relations the past 6 years from Beijing, and there was a consistent attempt by both the countries to de-hyphenate their own allies in developing this. But unfortunately, in the last 2-3 months, in the last, say, a year or so, we have seen this Pakistan factor coming into the India-China relations. It's not our bilateral problems that are causing problems for us. There are mechanisms in place, but I think this is what is causing that, the entry of Pakistan factor into the relationship. Same thing.
Pakistan may not be the only one. However, many Chinese observers and scholars try very hard to figure out what's behind the quiet shift in your foreign policy in Asia, particularly what you call reorientation geopolitically in this area. Now, there's been the alleged pro-conspiracy coastline of the Indian Ocean, and China has been talking about rebuilding the Gwadar deepwater port in Pakistan. Hambantota port in Sri Lanka also comes under scrutiny by the Indian media, and these seems to have all been taken into your consideration about the so-called conspiracy, to say nothing of our involvement in similar construction of a port in Myanmar, where we want to connect our oil supply with a route which is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, to make sure that our energy supply will not be disrupted. And I don't know whether this is part of our grand plan to divert our attention and excessive reliance on the Malacca Strait, since the United States has been so assertive in maintaining its primary in the Pacific Ocean. What do you think of this set of concerns on the Indian side to undertake what Wama calls reorientation in their foreign policy?
Well, we understand the Indian style of reorientation of their strategy as this way, 2 levels. On one level, India want to be a sooner or later global leader. So he need to enhance and enlarge their scope of strategy. That's why their influences began to be spread from Indian Ocean to Pacific Ocean. It's an inevitable trend. Sooner or later, we will see Indian presence in Pacific. However, on the other level, your previous question really has a potential seed among some of Chinese strategies. Say, Pacific is open. Every power can be here. However, if some power link interests to the other strategic player against China, then China will become nervous. For example, if now U.S. has stepped in the small South China Sea, and Japan say, "Oh, we want to step in either." If sometime, I just make an example. Sometime later, if I know, U.S. has been trying to pull India, Australia, Japan, all of the possible power into the small South China Sea. We will see, if sometime we see some Indian warships into the South China Sea on behalf of so-called freedom passage, then we will reassess or re-recognize their true intention about the orientation.
But Varma, a couple of years ago, the Indians complained that they have discovered the presence and whereabouts of a Chinese submarine in the Indian Ocean, hence the uproar in media reports about the intrusive behavior of the Chinese military. What do you think of your nationalist sentiments? In this age of internationalization, I mean, in this age of globalization, I mean, there's the free movement of resources and perhaps the maneuvers of the militaries, one way or another.
One interesting thing, one important thing in India-China relations I notice, unlike India-Pakistan relations, is the amount of interaction between the leaderships of both the countries. There's nothing that is preventing these two countries from discussing. So which means that differences as they grow, of course, now India is also on the rise, as Professor was saying. There will be concerns even from Chinese side too. So I see from the level of the presidents, prime ministers to national security advisors, there is a consistent, probably month-to-month basis, interactions at one level or the other between the two countries, which is a pretty good thing. I'm sure they're going to sort out any of these concerns and strategic issues. But to answer your question about the submarine, if you look at the map, that is, the Colombo is just a few miles away from the India's southern coast. And I think that is where India's concerns are quite larger, more than the Gwadar, which is of course a little far away from the Mumbai's coast. But if you look at it, that is naturally, if there was a concern at one time in India that Colombo or Sri Lanka could emerge as a naval base for Chinese warships, on whatever you call it. But so those concerns, I think, are being addressed from Sri Lanka itself and being discussed between India and China. I'm sure they'll work out a via media for that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. With that, we come to the end of this discussion about the triangle relationship between India, Japan, and China. I'll see you next time.